Next, it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Mr. Howard Putnam. Mr. Howard Putnam is the former CEO of the highly successful Southwest Airlines. Mr. Putnam was recruited to be the CEO of financially failing Braniff International. There, he was the first airline CEO to successfully take a major carrier into, through, and out of bankruptcy. Earlier in his career, he spent 20 years with United Airlines, his final position being Group Vice President of Marketing. He is the author of Winds of Turbulence. Mr. Putnam has also been an entrepreneur serving as the chairman of a startup investment company and 2 small manufacturing and distribution companies. Mr. Putnam grew up and learned how to fly on an Iowa farm and began his airline career as a baggage handler in Chicago. He has an MBA in marketing from the University of Chicago and attended Harvard's Advanced Management program. Mr. Putnam was inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame by the National Speaker Association in 2005. He is also accredited as a certified speaking professional. Mr. Putnam and his wife, Krista, live near Lake Tahoe. They have 2 sons, Mike, who's an airline captain, and a daughter, Sue, who is in public relations and marketing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Howard Putnam to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. When my commanding officer, Alex, here got me to the hotel last evening, I immediately went up to my room and I was going to track some of those delayed Southwest flights. But my Apple iPhone wouldn't work. You were right. You said they would get it. Navigating, leading through vision. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, as was mentioned, and always wanted to be in aviation after my dad bought a Piper Cub. But I'm partly colorblind. I tried to enlist and fly helicopters and was rejected. So I said, you know, I'm going to go from being a ticket agent, baggage handler. Someday I want to be the president of an airline. And I was probably 21, 22 years old, about the same as most of you in this room. And at that time, the little airline that my wife, who I met at Capital Airlines, she was a flight attendant. We'd just been married, and Capital was merged into United Airlines. And United, being the gigantic airline it was in those days, and bureaucratic and layers of management, I don't know how many psychologists they had in the people department, but too many. Anyway, they interviewed all of us young Turks to see if we qualified to come from Capital over to United. And the fellow that interviewed me, his name was Fred. At that point in time, I had no college education. And we sat across the table, and he asked me the typical HR questions, and then he looked at me and said, "Young man, what's your long-term goal?" And I looked him right in the eye and said, "I want to be the president of the airline." And he laughed at me. And that was emblazoned in my mind for many years. And every time as I moved up through the ranks, a step at a time, I was thinking, "Fred, I'm coming, Fred. That's one more." And finally the day came, 20 years later probably, and it was announced that I was leaving United to go down to Texas to run this little fledgling airline called Southwest Airlines. And the phone rings, and Linnea, my secretary, came in and said, "There's some man named Fred on the phone." Now, I knew he had retired a year or so, and I had seen him over the years, see him in the hallway. "Hi, Fred. Hi, Howard." But it never came up. And he got on the phone, and he was almost in tears, and he congratulated me, and he said, "I've never forgotten what I did." And he said, "I'm sorry." And with that, he hung up. What I didn't know was he was dying of cancer, and 3 months later, he passed away. So, you know, he gave me an incentive to move ahead, and I never forgot it. And that was a mistake that he made on his part. Obviously, he never forgot as well. So we got to Texas, and one of the first phone calls I got was one of your great sponsors here, Mitch Hart. You know, I had a chance to visit with Mitch and Linda out in the hallway, and we had known each other many years ago in Texas. And now we live in a little place east of Reno called Sparks, Nevada, so I found out Mitch drives past my house almost to go to his plant out in Fernley. But he was one of the first ones when we got to Texas to pick up the phone and welcome us to Texas. And then later on, I think we served on a board together with 1-800-Flowers, I believe it was at that time. So that one of the great things I think about what you all have going here is the associations, the friendships, the comradeship that will last a lifetime. And I cherish that of all the friends that I've had over the years from many places, and appreciate the opportunity, Linda and Mitch, to be here with you again. We lived in Reno for, I guess, 18 years now, Reno and Sparks. And this was at the Reno Air Races in 2009. And that's me and then my wife, Krista, on this side. But the two gentlemen in the middle I met for the first time that day, and we've become friends. And the gentleman in the blue shirt is Colonel Mark Tillman, who had just retired from the Air Force and was the commander of Air Force One and flew President Bush for 8 years. And then next to him was is now Vice Admiral Mark Fox, who's in Bahrain at the 5th Fleet. Now, at that time, he was heading up Fallon and Top Gun. And we've stayed in touch, and I'll show you shortly a few lines that the Admiral emailed me a while back. And I said, I'm going to the Naval Academy, and what if you were standing on stage, what would you say to all the attendees? And he came back in the middle of the night with an email. How little did I know that that was at the same time that the Somalis and the Iranian fishermen were being abducted and saved. And of course the Admiral was up all night long, I would imagine, and had a moment to send an email, which I've always appreciated. So thank you to them for their service, and God bless America. I learned, you talked about turbulence, taking Braniff International through bankruptcy, that turbulence was inevitable, misery was optional. And after 3 great years at Southwest Airlines, I lost my mind and agreed to leave and go across town and see if we could save this bigger company called Braniff International, which was about $1 billion airline at that point in time. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say they were cooking the books, but there wasn't the same amount of cash there that we thought there was when we agreed to leave Southwest and go try to save the company. And if you've ever been in the situation, if you ever are in a situation where you have 10,000 employees, 10,000 subordinates, you have $1 billion company, and find out you only have 10 days of cash, I can tell you it'll bring a lump to your throat. And I wanted to pick up the phone and call back to Southwest, to Herb Kelleher, the chairman, and say, Herb, I was just kidding. I didn't mean to resign. Bad decision. But once, and we all make them, but once you make the decision and the commitment, you go with it. I had never had any crisis management training. I got mine on the job right then. And fortunately, I didn't go by myself. I took my CFO, Phil Guthrie, with me. And my advice would be, if you ever do something crazy like that, don't go by yourself. Take somebody with you. And be sure your spouse is in agreement before you go. So Phil and I just sat down, the two of us, and just knuckled down and said, okay, we've got ourselves into a real jam. There's no backing out. We made the commitment. We're going to stay here and see this thing through. And so the two of us, when we picked 3 or 4 more to be sort of the inner circle, the senior management committee. And you know, another one, Sam Coates in Dallas, was one of that team. And 30 years later, we're all still the closest of friends. So through turbulence, you do learn, you do excel. And we stayed there and took the airline through bankruptcy, got it reorganized, got it flying again, got people back to work, paid back their creditors, and then I said I've had about all the fun I can stand and all the character building I need, and we went on to do other things. My friend Simon Sinek in New York wrote a book a couple of years ago called Start With Why. And I saw this in some of the literature that Lieutenant Seymour sent me about the conference. You know, the what and the why and the how. But Simon's thesis, and I agree with it, is that great organizations that have sustainability, they always start with why. Apple, why? What's the passion? What inspires them? And then finally you get to the how. How are we going to do this? And that's where you and I come in to many, many situations. The why has already been figured out. The passion, the reason, the inspiration, the long-term vision. Now how are we going to implement it? And finally you get down to the what. What is it we do? What do you speak on? So start with why, I think, is a very powerful statement for me. I also learned that, as you have and are learning, how important it is for the value of preparation, the training, the learning, the repetition, over and over and over. And Alex was telling me last night in the car some of the things that you all go through here in your first, second, third, and fourth years. And I would imagine training, learning, repetition over and over and over probably would come to mind. But the other one I like is when the time to perform arrives, the time to prepare is past. When the time to perform arrives, the time to prepare is past. It's too late. And I think the great example that exemplifies that for me is Captain Sullenberger of US Air, if you remember 3 years ago, when he landed that Airbus in the Hudson River as a glider. He had even had glider training earlier in his career. Obviously, he never knew he was going to be landing an Airbus as a glider. But he got everyone out safely. And I just met a New York City policeman recently who was the first responder. And he said his claim to fame was that he loaned Captain Sully his cell phone so that Captain Sully could call his wife and tell her he was okay. And I said, do you still use that cell phone? No, I have it at home. I'm saving it. It's on the mantle. But when the time to perform arrives, the time to prepare has passed. And Sully was up to the moment. Our son Mike is a captain for US Air in Charlotte and also flies the Airbus. And he sent me this email that I'm going to show, or this photo I'm going to show you now, that told me that after US Air went through this incident, they've changed the ditching training and they've changed the over-water training. And here's what they're doing now. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And as a youngster growing up on a farm in Iowa, Harry Truman was that president at that point in time. It's the first president I ever saw. He was standing on the back of a train going up and down the tracks in Iowa, campaigning. My, how the campaigning has changed since then. And my mentor was Eddie Carlson. Eddie was the co-founder of Western International Hotels in Seattle. And then United Airlines bought Western International Hotels, now Westin Hotels. And it's thinking there would be a lot of synergy between an airline and a hotel, and that did not turn out to be true. But Mr. Carlson came over to be the CEO of United Airlines. He didn't know he was my mentor until just a short time before he passed away. I wrote him a long letter to thank him for all he had done. And don't wait too long to do that. If there's somebody that you have learned from, who have been mentored by, tell them now while they can appreciate what you got out of it. But Eddie did so much for me, and one thing that he taught many of us is he always carried a little leather notepad like that one. And I still carry mine today. But he always carried his in his side pocket. And as soon as he got an idea from somebody or from a customer or an employee, he would whip this thing out and make a note. And he was so good at it that it was like drawing a gun. It became known as the Ready Eddie. And every once in a while, I'll be somewhere and pull out my little notepad, and somebody will say, you were with United Airlines at one time, weren't you? He had no idea he was leaving a legacy with his Ready Eddie pad. But he was a great guy, and he always said, nobody sings solo. It always takes the team to get it. And I think that's what was being reinforced here earlier this morning. And there's what Vice Admiral Mark Fox sent me the other day. And I thought it tied in so well to what you were talking about earlier. And I said, what would you say if you were on stage? And he said, those to whom much is given, much is expected. When I think of all the things that I don't deserve, being born in the USA in the latter half of the 20th century, a family, a healthy mind, an honorable profession, a fleet commander, it's clear that I have been given much. So what is expected of me? To be a good steward of all this, to create an environment as a leader that brings out the best in my subordinates, that brings out the best in my subordinates, and to create the conditions for them to succeed. Pretty powerful. And I printed it out, and I carry it in my pocket now myself just to refer to it once in a while. And I was on an airplane a while back with a young man who had a company. In fact, it was in Winnemucca, not far from your plant. And I asked him what business he had, and he said, I have this little machine shop, and I make these unique little things for the automobile industry. How many employees do you have? He said, 12. I said, how's the business going? The business is going fine. But he said, the damned employees are just driving me nuts. And I said, well, the damned employees is what's going to make your business a success. And if you don't deal with that first, I don't care how many patents you have and so forth. So he asked the question, what do you think makes a great leader? And this is not an all-inclusive list. What I wrote down on the airplane that day. And he said, may I have the list? I said, no, because you won't remember. So we spent the next hour just talking about leadership. And about 2 months ago, I got an email from him, it's the only one I've had, that said, I'm trying. And he didn't say how much progress he had made. But I think you heard earlier this morning, honesty, integrity. I've always appreciated the responsibility my parents gave me on that Iowa farm. Anybody here from Iowa? I'm always the only one. But they gave me responsibility, driving tractors, machinery, working with animals when I was 9 and 10 years old. I enjoyed having that responsibility. And I'm sure you all here will have the same opportunities. And then I learned you got to build trust. There is no team that is going to follow you anywhere if they don't trust you. Take a look at what's happening down the road in Congress and in government across the country these days. The passion, the inspiration, the vision, the flight plan. I'm not a visionary, but I can see what others have done, and maybe I can take that and tweak it and move it on. Authenticity. What you are standing on this stage is what you better be when you're off that stage. What you are in that uniform, which gives you a lot of credibility, you need to be when you're in your blue jeans and denim shirt. Developing the other leaders. We've heard that theme. The team spirit. Excellent communicator. I think we just heard communications mentioned before. When we were at Braniff in those early days and I was trying to figure out how do I communicate to 10,000 people that we're about to go out of business? Because when companies get in trouble, when organizations get in trouble, when battalions, brigades get in trouble, there is a tendency for people to pull the parka over your head and try to ignore that there may be even more turbulence ahead. And that's what happened with the Braniff folks. They didn't want to hear any more bad news. So I called in my friend Dr. Don Beck from Denton, Texas. Don was a university professor. Don is not a good businessman. If he were sitting here today, I would say it to his face. I doubt if he can balance his own checkbook. But when I needed ideas that I couldn't quite grasp how to handle myself, I would bring Don in to help me. And what I asked him one day was, what would you do if you were me to communicate with 10,000 people? I don't have time to fly all over the world to 9 countries to talk to them when you got 10 days of cash. What would you do to try to get their attention and see if you can get them to trust in this new management that's just arrived? And the next morning when I got into the office about 7 o'clock, there were 3 or 4 sheets of paper under my office door. And I looked at them and it was from Don. And here's what he suggested. And it's the best communications device I've ever been involved with. He said, write all 10,000 employees a letter at home to the family, 1 page, and just say, I'm your last hope as the CEO. And if we can't figure out how to turn this company around very quickly, you and I are all going to be out of a job. And he said, then just attach a blank sheet of paper and number it 1, 2, and 3. And just ask him for 3 suggestions. 1, how to reduce costs. 2, how can you increase revenue? 3, a measurable quality control or productivity measurement. Just three simple items. He said, that'll get them engaged. They'll start thinking that maybe it's their company, not mine, not your company. I said, how many people do you think, Don, will respond to this out of 10,000? He said, if you get 500 replies, that would probably be about right. I said, well, then I'm going to put a PS on the letter, and I did. And I put the PS said, if you will sign your name to the 3 suggestions you send me, you will get a personal reply from me. That was a mistake. It really wasn't. I got 3,000 responses, 30% replied. And there was some pretty vicious stuff in their suggestions. And I answered every one. It took me over 60 days. I had little notepads, you know, from the desk of Howard Putnam. And if we were in a meeting like this, I'd be sitting up there where you are pretending I'm listening, but I was writing notes. And if we went to a dinner, I had Krista drive, and I was writing notes. And if you went to the men's room, you could find out where I was because I was writing notes. It was a powerful thing that happened. People had never had a handwritten note from the CEO before. They saved it. They carried it with them. They took it on airplanes. They showed it to passengers. And pretty soon, the Wall Street Journal got a hold of it. It was in the journal. Zig Ziglar was doing a big rally at Reunion Arena, and he and a couple of the others that one night, and he invited me to come, and I had to go meet with the creditors in New York. So he gave 500 employees from Braniff tickets to come, and every time the word Braniff was mentioned, they got a standing ovation. And the motivation began to turn. And unfortunately, we finally ran out of cash 7 months later, and we had to put it into bankruptcy. But still today, I still hear from some of those Braniff employees after all those many years. And there was one young lady named Joy Clements, no relation to the then governor of Texas, who was a flight attendant. And she had written me a note saying that she had gone home to Philadelphia for an early Christmas because she could see the handwriting on the wall that she was probably going to get furloughed. And she took her last $250 that she had and bought Christmas presents. And when she got to Philadelphia, the Christmas presents were missing. And she said, I know what happened to them. My fellow employees at DFW Airport stole them. What are you going to do about it? And we had a theft ring at DFW that we hadn't been able to catch them yet. We later did. We got 22 of them on Christmas Eve. But so I wrote Joy back a note, and I was about to go down to accounting to get a check for $250, and I thought, oh, I can't do that. And because all that organization was in the Teamsters Union, and I knew how the word would spread. So I just wrote her a personal check for $250 and sent it to her with a little note on how sorry I was. Now, Mitch, if you want to check the integrity of your marriage to Linda, go home and explain why you wrote a check to a flight attendant for $250. And then tell her it's for Christmas gifts. But fortunately, my wife had been a flight attendant, so she understood. Anyway, we caught the bad guys. We get the airline reorganized. We get it flying again, and we go on to other things. And I would say 6 or 7 years went by, and Krista and I were in Collin Creek Mall in a little Mexican restaurant called Tino's, which I think is still there, one night, and I remember hearing this baby crying. But I didn't pay any attention. I was just trying to get it out of my mind. And after they finished eating, this man and woman came over to our table, and this lady was holding a little baby in her arm. Didn't say anything, just opened her purse and handed me an envelope. And I looked at it, and I thought, that's my handwriting. And I opened it up, and it was my note to Joy Clements. And here she was, 7 years later. So we hugged and embraced, and she had gotten furloughed and gone on unemployment, and finally met her husband, and he had a good job, and now things were going well. They had this little baby. And I said, Joy, why are you still carrying that envelope around after 7 years, 6 years, whatever it was? And she said, because that came at a time in my life when I was really down, and I didn't think anybody cared. But you not only sent the check, but you wrote me a note. And she said, I just keep it on the top of my purse to remind me that every day I need to say thank you to somebody, or write a handwritten note to somebody. So after all those 3,000 handwritten notes, I know of one that truly paid off. Emails are nice and all, but they're impersonal. Don't ever forget the power of the handwritten note as you go through the years. Don't ever forget the mentors that have helped you along the way. Some play the game, others change the way the game is played. And when I got to Southwest, I had nothing to do with starting Southwest. I can take no credit for it. Rollin King had the idea. I was the second CEO. But this was the discussion that Herb Kelleher, the chairman and co-founder, and I had. Are we just going to play the game like other airlines? Or are we going to change the way the game is played? And we decided, let's keep going down the path that Southwest has been on and change the way the game is played. There's another guy that changed the way the game is played, A few of us are old enough to remember 40 years ago when D.B. Cooper jumped out of an airplane, the Northwest Airlines airplane near Portland, Oregon, out of a 727, and that was the first for ransom hijacking, and he got $200,000. He's never been found. This was in the Reno paper just before for Christmas time. And a fellow sent me this photo several years ago. That's taken in Portland. That is the exact airplane that D.B. Cooper jumped out of. With a magnifying glass, he was able to read the N number and found out it was the airplane. And those 727s, they had a rear stair that came, a ventral stair, and they were perfect for hijacking. Nobody ever thought of that when they were building airplanes. So they had to bolt all those shut. But D.B. Cooper changed the way the game is played. That's what the Reno, Nevada airport looked about 1976. And look, they even had kids out on the tarmac getting their pictures taken. D.B. Cooper caused us to go to security, putting fences around airports, tremendous cost. And he didn't change the game, the way the game was played for good, but he certainly caused us to change the way we thought about security. And then he, of course, caused the copycats, and the hijackings were everywhere after that. And how did we get the $200,000 that night? The bank was closed on a Friday night, and I went down to Harrah's and to Harold's Club, and that's a cocktail napkin that one of our supervisors, Wayne Duvall, signed. It says, received from Harold's Club, $150,000. I don't know whether that would work today or not, but you can see the FBI agent even signed it at the bottom. I'm not sure of his name, Harold Dwifer or something like that. But we caught the guy after he jumped out and got all the money back. But one man, D.B. Cooper, changed the way the game was played. And I remember when my dad brought that Piper Cub like that home in Iowa, and I was just a kid. And when he landed and taxied up to the barn, we're out there applauding this great event. And I remember thinking, you know, we don't have any electricity. We don't have any indoor plumbing. We don't have any hot water. But we got an airplane out here in the pasture. So that's where my passion began. Dad taught me how to fly. The years went by. I taught son Mike how to fly, the captain for U.S. Air. And then he got his instructor's rating a few years later at Oklahoma State. We lived in Texas then, and he came home one weekend and said he had his instructor's rating. And I hadn't flown in 5 years. We'd just taken Braniff through Chapter 11. I was all stressed out. And I thought, how neat this would be. I teach son how to fly. Now son takes dad out and signs his logbook. So we went out and flew for 3 hours, came back. I handed him my logbook to sign, and he pushed it back, and he said, I'm not signing that. You're not safe to fly by yourself. So I said what any loving father would say to his son, screw you, you're out of the will. So I haven't flown since. But that was the little airline I started with at Capital and met my wife, and then it was merged into United, and then we got the call to go to Texas to the little fledgling airline of Southwest. The amazing thing to me about Southwest is that we only had 12 airplanes and 1,000 employees and only flew in the state of Texas. Today, they have 550 airplanes, 38,000 employees. They carry more passengers last year than any other airline in the United States. And they have made money now 38 years in a row, which is a record unmatched by not any airline, but almost any company. And you'll learn as you watch through the cycles. And that was the Swallow that first carried the airmail in 26, and then we went to the World War II. You've probably seen that on YouTube. That was the first jet airplane, the B-59, that they used to hang the wooden propeller on to try to confuse people that it wasn't a jet airplane. But the cycle went on, and then the cycle came to an end commercially with the Concorde going back home. But now it's started all over again with the unmanned aircraft and the drones. So everything goes in cycles. Economies, people, countries, wars. So if you can figure out where you are in the cycle, and that's what we were able to do when we got to Southwest. So those were the three questions that I felt we had to answer. You know, what is the vision? There wasn't written down on paper. There has to be a superordinate goal for every organization, I'm convinced. And it has to be succinct and simple. You got to figure out what business are you really in. And we figured out we weren't an airline. We were in mass transportation. That's just the focus, mass transportation. My dad always said, if you chase two rabbits, you'll never catch either one. Chase one rabbit. And Southwest Airlines has chased one rabbit now for a little over 40 years. The culture, that's the key, the people. You are the key to the United States Navy, whichever military organization you're a part of, the Marine Corps, etc. It's the people that are going to make the difference. It's so simple, but we miss it so often. We get so hooked up in all the other garbage and bureaucracy. And then innovation will hatch from the above. I think there's three kinds of innovation, and this is not my list, but there's incremental innovation, and I think you see that most of the time in government. Very slow to adapt and change. There's disruptive innovation, which I think is what Southwest did. It turned an industry upside down and got people thinking in a different direction. And then finally, you have something massive, transformational, like I think Apple has done with the ideas that Steve Jobs and all had over the years. But here was a key to Southwest Airlines. That uniform. They only had, originally they only had female flight attendants. There's the first graduating class 40 years ago. Hard to believe it's 40 years. Two of those young ladies are still flying, I'm told. But the uniform was key in that I found out after we interviewed a lot of them, they had all been in high school or college. Cheerleaders, drum majorettes, baton twirlers. They were in show business. They knew they were going to look good in that uniform when they came to apply for the job. So the people department interviewed a lot of them, and there's what we found out. They all had the same commonalities. Attitude, and the attitude became our mantra. Higher attitudes develop skills. Higher attitudes develop skills. If you don't have the right people in the group, it's very difficult. They're all cheerful, optimistic, great decision makers. They love customers, team spirit, communication, confidence, self-starter, sense of humor. Today, Southwest still hires across the board using that list of attributes. You can't teach people to do those games and stories and all that they tell on airplanes. The other, 2 or 3 months ago, I was going from Reno to Las Vegas early one morning, and everybody was kind of in a grumpy mood until they got their first cup of coffee. And the male flight attendant got on the PA up front, and he said, before I start the safety announcement, I want to call your attention to Kim in the middle of the aisle, one of the other flight attendants. So we all look out to see Kim. And he said, Kim is my ex-wife. She's a great lady, but the alimony is just killing me. So if any of you have any interest, just push your call button. Well, I'd say at least 9 guys pushed their call button. And my arm was heading in that direction. Now, you can't teach people to do that. It has to come from within. Higher attitudes, develop the skills. And we used to do a lot of crazy games. We had a steak and beans contest one time, and my team lost, so I had to wear the prisoner's outfit. And Herb Kelleher's the chairman over there in the king's outfit. And my job was to cut up his steak and go get him drinks. And as Mitch knows, that was a full-time job. And Herb is known, he would not make a good poster boy for the healthcare industry, but I think he's 80 or 81 now, and he still smokes 3 packs a day, can drink a quart of wild turkey a day if required. He's frequently required. I don't think he's ever exercised in his life, but he is just an icon in the airline industry and with the people, and has done a tremendous job over the years. And that's the current CEO, Gary Kelly. And every year the employees decide what he's going to dress up as on Halloween, and then he has to go out and fly for a day. So this was from that character from Hairspray a couple of years ago. Last year they did Toy Story 3, I think it was. But that's what Gary looks like in real life in the blue shirt, and Herb Kelleher and Colleen Barrett. Great people. The Braniff thing I mentioned, and I'm not going to spend any more time on it, but the point is, when something is great, it can also fail. When something is great, it can also fall. And we've seen that in the financial industry, we've seen it in the auto industry and all. Somebody has to keep a hold of that vision and keep it on the right track. I want to close with just a few thoughts on these, and then we'll open it up to see what you all would like to visit about. But I think there's three things that are really important. Ethics, having role models, being a role model, and how perception can sometimes become reality. And added to all of that, if I were to add another one there, I'd say you got to have some balance in your life. Not only a work balance, but also a family and a life balance. And there was one of my great heroes and role models, Coach Landry of the Cowboys. And, you know, he always wore that hat, whether it was 100 degrees or 10 below zero. So I went out, we're dedicating an airplane to the Cowboys. So I went out and spent $40 for that little fedora that I'm wearing, because he never smiled. He was very stoic and serious. And he never even let on I was standing there. So the years went by, and this is Vern Lundquist, the announcer over here. The years went by, and I'm out of Braniff, and he had been fired by Jerry Jones when he bought the Cowboys, and the coach and I were teamed up in a charity golf tournament. And I couldn't resist, and I went over to him and said, "Coach, do you remember the day we dedicated the airplane to the Cowboys?" "Yes." I said, "You know, I spent $40 on a hat just to try to get a smile out of you." And he came over and put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "I know. I wasn't going to give you the satisfaction." But a great role model, a super guy. And there, anybody from Philadelphia? Recognize Jaws. I spoke at one of his events last year, and what a great guy he is. And I've heard nothing but tremendous things about him from an ethics standpoint and family and all. Now, there's one of the most famous men in the world. Does anybody recognize his face? That's Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. And Neil comes to the air races in Reno once in a while, but he had his 81st or 82nd birthday a few months ago, and I sent him an email to congratulate him and got an answer within 20 minutes. So the minds are still active, the bodies are active. They're great role models, great patriots. And then there's the last man to land on the moon, Gene Cernan. Same way. In fact, I just saw him the other day on Cavuto talking about the space program, and he too is in that same age group. Age is no longer a factor, folks. I mean, over 18% of the people over 65 are still engaged in the workforce. And it's a love, it's a passion. Now, perception. Anybody see anything wrong with that sign? There's no 708. And you know why that was important? That was my room. Not last night, Alex. I had a room last night. But that is in Portland, Oregon, in the Vintage Plaza Hotel. And I got off the elevator with the bellman and said, "Wait a minute, there's no 708. He said, "Yeah, there is, man. Just come around the corner and look." So I go around and look, and there it is. He went back and looked at the sign, and he said, "You know, I've been here 5 years. Never noticed that before." I'm thinking, who's paying attention to the small stuff around here? You know, we always talk about the 30,000-foot view and the vision and all, but somebody's got to pay attention to the small stuff, because that's what makes such a difference. Krista and I have friends, my wife's name is Krista, have friends near Chicago who he got into the horse racing, thoroughbred horse racing business 25 years ago after he sold his company. And that is a tough business. But his goal was, I will have a Kentucky Derby winner. And 4 years ago, in 2007, they did have. It was the horse's name was Street Sense. But many years ago, Jim and I, his name was Jim Taffel, we were talking about what little things really make a difference. And if I can quote him accurately, he said that in a horse race, a horse will go about 45 miles an hour around the track. It will go 5 horse lengths every second. And I said, how much difference does the jockey make? And he said, the jockey in the course of a race can make about 3 horse lengths difference. But he said, that's 3/5 of a second, and that can win the race. And I never thought of it in that perspective. Anyway, the years go by. Krista and I are back up in Portland. We were heading down for a paddle boat trip. I asked the cabbie how long it would take to go downtown, and she said, "You're not really going to do this." I said, "Yeah, we're going to go see if they ever fix the sign." In that hotel, cabbies let us out. We ran upstairs to the 7th floor with the camera. Same sign, still there. It took them another 5 years. It took them 10 years before they finally got the sign there. Perception can become reality, the little things. And this guy, this was in Houston, and if you notice, the clubhouse is on fire. But he was teeing off. And I took this out of Golf Digest, and they went over and interviewed him and said, the clubhouse is on fire. He said, well, I had a tee time. What difference can I make with the clubhouse on fire? Perception. And this was the safety card on a major airline for several years before they changed it on one fleet of airplanes. If you're sitting in an exit row and you can't read this card, tell somebody. You know, perception can become reality. If safety is your number one game, you better be living true to it. And then I saw this P-51 at the air races one time, and I thought, you know, an airplane will fly with 2 blades, 3 blades, 4 blades, as long as they're all in balance. If one's out of balance, you're going to crash and burn. And the same thing can happen to people. So I drew my own little graphic. Mine says family, work, community, church, and personal. And I still have it hanging up in my home office in Nevada. Because we all get out of balance. And as you all go through the pressures here and move on to your next assignments, that balance is going to be more difficult for you to keep in line. So we've tried to do some crazy things. That was my Christmas present with son Mike a few years ago to go drive NASCAR at Charlotte. And then USA Today dared me to do another skydive, so we did that one 3 years ago. And if you notice, the only one that doesn't have a helmet is me, the client. But I was thinking as we jumped out at 13,000 feet, what difference is it going to make if the chute doesn't open? The helmet's not going to help that much. And I took our daughter Sue along with me to do that one. So do some things that are outside your comfort zone and engage the family. My neighbor is a UPS captain, and he got a glider. I really am not a glider fan. I still like to hear the noise of an engine somewhere. And then I saw that bumper sticker, are you really the person your dog thinks you are? And that's probably a pretty great challenge for all of us to have to live up to. And if you're interested, every week I write a little very short email on leadership and on ethics. And I don't charge for it. You can pass it on to anybody. And if it's helpful and you can use it, feel free to. You can just sign up on the website. My friend Art Holst, who is still speaking, and Art is about 87, 88, was a National Football League official for many years, did a lot of Super Bowls with Jim Tunney. And Art is a great writer of poetry. And 2 years ago, we were together, and I asked him, could you write me something I could use to close sometimes when I'm speaking? And he said, about what? And I said, aviation, the future, integrity, technology. And with his great talent, this is what he wrote, and it only took him 20 minutes. And he called it To the Stars. And he said, over 100 years have passed since Orville Wilbur Wright, upon the sands of Kitty Hawk, made that monumental flight. But in our eternal searchings to make things better soon, we've gone from Kitty Hawk to Lindbergh to Armstrong and Cernan on the moon. But now we look beyond those clouds to travel to the stars. But balance is the partner of technology and schemes, and dedicated people make reality out of dreams. So, as we close this session, a final thought I have to share. How you perceive the future will chart the course to get you there. God bless America. Lieutenant, do you want to do any questions if we have time?
Thank you, Mr. Putnam. I actually saw you speak at the University of Texas. I'm from the University of Texas, and you brought up that same hotel picture of the rooms, and we were at the Westin, and there was the same problem. It went from 227, and then it ended at 229. And so once you see that, you can't unsee it. I want to ask you about hiring attitudes and developing skills. I'm a midshipman in the NROTC program, and part of government is that, or sort of part of the bureaucracy that you mentioned is, we kind of have to deal with the people that we get. How do you foster that same mentality of, even if you can't, specifically pick people for those attitudes, still fostering those attitudes while imparting them with those skills, especially in our line of work?
Well, attitude, I think, starts at the top. Linda was mentioning out in the hallway about the foyer about what great attitudes they had with the people that worked for them in Fernley, Nevada. Now, I think wherever Mitch and Linda Hart go, I don't care what state it is or what kind of company it is, you're going to hear the same thing. What great people we have working for us. Because it starts with them. It starts with the attitude. And I always felt it was my responsibility to set the tone, set the attitude. And once you get people to buy into that, it just magnifies. And last year, Southwest Airlines had 270,000 applications for employment, and this is on their website. 270,000 applications for employment that were unsolicited. It's because their brand is so clear, the vision is so clear as to what business they're in, that people say, I would be a fit to work there, and they just apply for the job. That is a tremendous compliment to the leadership of Southwest Airlines. And I think it can happen in any organization, but there's got to be a commitment in the vision, the superordinate goal, understand what business we're in, and when you say people are number one, you darn well better mean it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Shipman Dixon from the U.S. Naval Academy. Sir, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us and all the wisdom. Question regarding your quote, you said some play the game and others change how the game is played. How did Southwest even think of breaking the mold of, every time I fly on Southwest, there's always a joke. Everyone's always laughing before and when you land. And then there's always they dress up every once in a while and they kind of like shock you, like you're not expecting that. How did Southwest come to that point and change to that?
We copied a lot from an airline in California called PSA, Pacific Southwest Airlines. And they only had one kind of airplane in those days. So simplicity, Southwest only has one kind of airplane, all 737. But PSA also had, at that time, this was in the 60s, only had female flight attendants, and they also wore the similar kind of a uniform. The guy that had the idea for Southwest Airlines was Rollin King. And Rollin King said, why don't we take the concept, the basics of PSA and bring it to Texas and start a commuter airline in Texas. And he engaged Herb Kelleher, who was his attorney at that time, to help him incorporate the airline and get it started. I'm not certain that in 1971 the concept would have worked in the state of New York or some other state. There was an attitude in the state of Texas in those days of entrepreneurs, oil and gas, real estate, and everybody just jumped on the bandwagon to support little old Southwest Airlines. They portrayed themselves as the underdog, as they were, because the other airlines tried to keep them out of business. And then they played on the attitude thing, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. So they had some help from PSA in California to get it started.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Mr. Putnam.
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel Eklund from the Air Force Academy. I'm reading the paper right now. If you were invited into American or the new United between the United Continental merger, what would your advice be to them? Go in what direction? And what would be your forecast? Since you've been through, an airline that's now gone, what do you see ahead?
Well, the first thing is if they called and said, would you come help us? The answer is no. I ain't doing that again. You can see it coming over the years with American, United, and all. They're getting bigger and bigger. They're trying to do international, trying to do transcontinental. They're trying to do short haul. They're trying to be all things to all people. And also there's been tremendous egos in all of those organizations. When the ego gets out of control, as it did at Braniff before we got there with a man named Harding Lawrence, go find another job somewhere else. But there is enough blame to go around at American and United with management, with unions, with employees, and everybody just trying to get greedy, 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 and the costs go up and up and up. So Americans, in my opinion, if I'd been running American, I'd have put them in bankruptcy 3 years ago. They have gone through a tremendous amount of cash trying to, I understand, they wanted to be honorable and do the right thing. But finally, you have to look at all the constituencies you serve, and bankruptcy was the best course of action for them. They need to synthesize what business they're really in, simplify their fleets, and take care of their people. And I don't mean just in salaries. But if you fly American and United, I was on American last night, I'll be on United this afternoon, the attitudes and the culture has deteriorated over the years. So simplify it, figure out what business you're in, and take care of your people.
Sir Midshipman First Class Trujillo, thank you for a great speech. You talked a lot about characteristics of leaders and attributes to have, and then you also mentioned relationships with certain subordinates in the letters you wrote. Is there any one particular quality you have as a leader, or you recommend, or your favorite quality, I guess, that helps foster relationships with subordinates?
Honesty and integrity. I'd leave it at that.
Fair enough. Thanks, sir.
How you doing, sir? My name is Josh Suvak from Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. My question is, Southwest has never sold their fares on sites like Expedia or Travelocity. I guess my question is, how do you take that risk as a CEO to potentially, lose those customers? However, that's turned out to be a really good business practice for Southwest.
Yeah, well, it goes back when we were there, the fares were so low. It was like $28 to go from Dallas to Houston. And the travel agents continually complained that we needed to raise their commissions. And I met with all the travel agencies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and said, we're not going to raise your commission. Our fares are low. We're here to create a market. We're here to make the pie bigger, get more people to fly. And you're going to have to figure out how you charge a service charge. Otherwise, don't book Southwest Airlines. And I was almost booed out of the building that I would have the audacity to say, go ahead. And so they said, we'll boycott you. And we said, go ahead. Didn't make any difference. The customer wanted the Southwest Airlines product. And so that's why they don't need Expedia and the Travelocity and the other. They sell, I believe it's 82% of all their business off their one website. So if the vision's right and the product and the service and the people are right, the customers will come get you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming and speaking to us, sir. I'm Midshipman Smith from University of Maryland, and I just want to know, you're talking about life balance with, family and work and all that kind of thing. When you wake up in the morning, what do you keep as your #1 priority?
Well, at my age, I look for the bathroom. So. I'm sorry, that was a Southwest answer. I think, and I'm over 65. I think about health every morning when I get up. I don't think about how much money am I going to make today, whatever. But I start with health, and I got Krista, my wife, to think about working out again. So for the last 3 months, every morning that I'm home, we walk down to the clubhouse in this little community we live in, and we do the weights and so forth. And we both are beginning to feel better again. And we're feeling better about ourselves. And when you feel better about yourselves, then you can start thinking outward, and see what you can do for others. I enjoy what we're doing here today. And I never thought it would be my role in life to be doing this. But because of certain experiences you have, you sort of end up doing it by accident. So, if we leave one thought with each one of you here today that helps you somewhere down the road, that would make my day just perfect.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, we got an on-time arrival. It's 10 o'clock. Okay. I thought he was leaving.
Sir, third class Atkins. Sir, if you're working with a group of employees and you have a couple that are obstinate or going against your vision, how do you work to get them on board and kind of unite the group and get them all moving in the same direction so you can get things done?
At Southwest, we didn't have to do that. The peer pressure is so strong at Southwest, and they've had profit sharing all these many years. They don't have pension plans, so they don't have any unfunded liabilities. Only the pilots have a pension plan and it's fully funded. The peer pressure is so strong at Southwest that you will get drummed out of the core by your peers, and seldom do those bad apples hang around very long. I can't remember of more than 5 people that I ever had to terminate in the 3 years that I was at Southwest Airlines. It just doesn't happen. And the other employees are a great part of that. They don't want you screwing up their dessert.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.